So, we've been doing these episodes a couple times now. So like always, we're gonna kind of start off with a little bit of development history. Maybe some of the reception, some of the reviews, things like that. So let me go ahead and run through it for Uncharted 4. So, on November 14th, 2013, Naughty Dog released a teaser trailer for the new Uncharted game, saying that it would be released for the PS4. The trailer at the time featured a voiceover by Todd Stashwick, who was supposed to play Sam, Nathan Drake's brother. And then in March 2014, it was announced that Amy Hennig, the series writer and creative director, along with Justin Richmond, the game director of Uncharted 3 and 4 at that time, had both left the studio and joined Visceral Games and Riot Games, respectively, along with Todd Stashwick as well. And this was kind of during that time where we were all like, man, what's going on with Uncharted 4? People are leaving, things are getting switched up, is the game going to be bad? What's happening? And so a few months later, Naughty Dog co-president Evan Wells revealed that the game directors for The Last of Us, Neil Druckmann and Bruce Straley, were now leading the project in Hennig's absence. And as a result, many of the story elements and 8 months of shooting, motion capture, and things of that nature were scrapped and abandoned.
Ching ching. That's a lot of money gone.
It is a lot of money, man. And then Troy Baker was also confirmed as the new voice of Sam later that summer during a E3 demo, where he kind of showed up at the end and said something about, hey, baby brother, or whatever like that. And so then after several delays, you guys remember this, Uncharted 4 got delayed a couple times. On March 18th, Naughty Dog announced that the development of Uncharted 4 was completed and that the game went gold and would later be released in a few weeks well, that's not just a few weeks, would be released later on May 10th. And the game's original score was written by Henry Jackman, if that name sounds familiar to any of you dear listeners. He actually worked on the Captain America Civil War soundtrack, so some of the music that you've heard in that movie was produced by the same guy. The soundtrack was released the same day as the game, and I can personally attest to it being incredible, because I don't really buy a whole lot of video game soundtracks, but that was one that I definitely picked up and had on repeat for quite some time.
I didn't even know you could buy video game soundtracks.
Not many people, not many developers or I guess publishers, whatever. Not many games have their soundtracks available for you to buy, but the ones that do are kind of hit or miss. You can buy the Gears of War soundtracks, but they're not that great. But yeah, this one apparently you can buy all of Uncharted. The Uncharted games, you can buy all of their soundtracks.
Nice.
So I think Uncharted 1 through 3's soundtracks are like $8 on iTunes. So, keep your backlogs and finances.
For all three of them together, $8?
No, $8 a piece.
Oh, okay.
And then I think Uncharted 4's was 10, I think, or something like that. So, but yeah, man, it's good stuff. As far as reception goes, I mean, we kind of talked about that a couple weeks ago during the review section. The game has gotten mostly 9s or 10s, with the exception of that one dude from the Washington Post who apparently hates the game. But yeah.
And a few weeks ago, they said, 2.7 million copies have been sold?
That's a lot of games.
Yeah. And normally, listening to some other podcasts, talk about how PlayStation usually doesn't drop numbers like that, so it must be pretty proud of it.
Yeah, man.
That was like 2 weeks ago, so I'm sure it's it's probably over 3 million by now, I guess.
Oh, for sure. So. But yeah, man. So, and plus our review is up on the website too. I gave it a 4.5 out of 5.
My favorite thing about its development was at E3 last year when they showed the gameplay demo and they forgot to turn on the PlayStation controller, or the controller had died or something like that. They just had Nathan Drake standing there for 30 seconds or something like that. Everyone's like, what is happening? And then now there's a trophy in the game for doing that at the right, after the chapter begins, if you don't move for 30 seconds, you get a trophy for it.
Is that what that glitch is?
Yeah.
I'm gonna have to go back and do that, because I saw that trophy and I was like, I didn't catch that, so I don't know what it is.
Yeah, it's after you climb you're in the city and you climb the big tower with the bell. Once you leave that scene and before you drive the truck down the mountain or whatever, down through town and stuff like that, it's right there.
I'm gonna have to go back and do that then.
Yeah, it's an easy trophy.
That is easy.
It'll take you about 30 seconds.
Is it a bronze? Is it a bronze trophy?
Probably.
Fair enough. I'll take it. But yeah, as far as that is the game in a nutshell in terms of production and things of that nature. Adam, good sir. I think it's that time for spoilers.
Yes, spoiler.
So, dear listeners, if you have not played this game yet and you don't want any bit of it spoiled, which by the way, you really do need to go into this game with a fresh pair of eyes and ears. If you have not played the game, stop the podcast right now. Seriously, even if you're okay with spoilers, stop the podcast because this is an amazing game. When you finish the game, then come back and listen to this episode. But other than that, you've been warned. Warned. Hashtag words are hard. Adam, good sir, tell us about Uncharted 4.
Spoilers in 3, 2, 1. Nathan dies and dries. No, I'm kidding.
Nathan dies and drives.
Dries. It's a late Sunday night recording. It's much later than we normally do.
It's definitely more casual. It feels more casual for some reason. I don't know why.
Laid back. It's because you got a job.
Is that what it is? Is that what it is?
Like you're a new guy.
That sounds about right.
Anyways, so let me just go through a quick story synopsis. I'm not going to go in probably a ton of details, but I do want to kind of cover a story. Again, it would help if you played the game. Hopefully you didn't just jump into 4. Hopefully you do get to play 1 through 3 because it really does. You pick up a lot of the background of Nathan and Yelena's, relationship, why the stuff we're talking about later in regards to their marriage and their communication is so important, and yada yada. So the game kind of opens up. It's one of those games where you start the game and you're kind of in the middle of the game, but then they rewind you back to the beginning of the story, and then you get to the opening scene again, and then you finish out the story later. So you open up on a boat, and Nathan and Sam are running from the bad guys, and you get run over by another huge boat, and you're like, crap, what just happened?
Can I just stop you there for 1 second? How awesome was that opening?
It was pretty good.
Oh man, good.
Boat chases.
So good.
I don't remember the other. I remember was it the second game where you're climbing up the train?
Yep.
That was a good one. I don't quite remember 3's intro.
3's was where Nathan and Sam walked into the bar.
Oh, snap. That was my favorite.
Yeah, and it ended with them getting shot, and you were like, whoa, what just happened?
That was my favorite because I thought the fist fighting was just phenomenal.
It was fun. It was really
and that I'm like, this is awesome. This is what I want.
So good.
Anyway, so you start off in the boat, but then they rewind you back to Nathan living in an orphanage, and then Sam kind of comes and breaks him out. And it felt very, I don't know about you, but it felt very Last of Us.
I was going to say that if you didn't.
That intro where you're hiding behind the couch and slowly getting around, and you climb out the window, and then you're running on the roof and stuff like that. So you find the story of they stay together, and then after the intro, you find them in prison, and you're wondering okay, what did Nathan get himself into? And so you have this little fist fight, and then you're working with this guard, and they have this little walk, and they take you in. You find out that Nathan and Sam and another guy, Rafe, are in prison because they're looking for Avery's treasure, and they think that it is somewhere in regards to or a clue is somewhere in regards to the prison. And so you explore around the prison, and then you with Sam and Rafe are talking to the prison guard, and he's like, I want some money. And then all the crap hits the fan, and Rafe shoots the security guard or the prison officer, and then they have to escape because of course there's a gunshot. And in the series of escaping, Sam gets shot, he falls, Nathan can't grab him, and it's assumed that Sam has died.
Yep.
So then they fast forward again to approximately 3 years after the third Uncharted. So Nathan is now married, and he has put his adventuring behind him, and he is now a salvage worker doing scuba diving, which was kind of a cool thing because you're doing the scuba diving, and you're like, oh man, what are we gonna find? And then you just find some crate, and you're like,
yep.
Lame.
That reveal was actually it was very well done.
Yeah. And so you go up on the boat, and this guy's like, hey, there's this Malaysian job if you want to go do it. And he's like, I can't. Do you have the proper permits?
Yeah.
And it's like so 180 compared to where Nathan Drake was, where he just kind of did whatever he wanted. He didn't care about the authorities. He's just, I'm going to go treasure hunting. But now he's like an old married man. He has responsibility. He doesn't want to get in trouble because he loves his wife. So he's passing up on like a sure job, like an easy job, but they don't have the right papers. And so that's kind of the conflict that is formed at the beginning of the game is Nathan has retired from his adventuring ways. He's become an old married man. He's not taking any chances. He loves his wife. He doesn't want to take those chances. But then all of a sudden, his brother enters the picture again. So Sam walks to his office and he's like, "Oh, I'm looking for my little brother." And he's like, "What in the world?" Because again, he thought his brother was dead.
Yeah.
Sam tells a story about how this old drug lord got him out of prison, and now he owes this drug lord all this money because he told him he was going to find the treasure, blah, blah, blah. So Nathan lies to Yelena, says he's going to do this Malaysian job because they got the papers. So that's the beginning of the lies for Nathan, saying that this guy got the papers and they're going to do this job. So next you have Sam and Nathan treasure hunting. I'm not going to go into all the details, play the game. But then later you find out, Yelena finds out that they're actually not doing the Malaysian job. She comes and confronts him. There's a conflict there. Sully is saying, "Go to your wife." Sam's saying, "Go to your wife." Right? Didn't Sam say to go to his wife?
Sam even brought it up for a second there.
Yeah. But Nathan's like, "No, I'm all in on this," because you find out in the middle of the game, and later you find out because Nathan tells Yelena this history because she didn't even know that he had a brother.
Mm-hmm.
Nathan had kept it a secret that he had a brother and that he had died. And then later in the story, as they're kind of explaining, they do another flashback to finding out some of Sam and Nathan's history about their mom, which was another really cool scene.
That was cool.
I think both of those flashbacks as kids was really, really interesting.
Yep.
It would only have been better if it was like their parents, their last name was Croft originally instead of Morgan. Her name was Laura because, I mean, let's be real, that would have been perfect.
That would have been perfect.
And his grandfather was Indiana Jones. But so you find all these details. Short story, they find Libertalia, this treasure that, what was it? What was Avery's first name?
Captain Henry Avery.
And then Thomas too. They had tricked all these pirates into kind of creating this utopia of money where everybody puts their money together and there's like freedoms and there's none of these rules that you have in other civilizations. But then you find out that Avery into sabotaged everybody and like took all their money and there was this big war and they kind of destroyed themselves. Rafe comes back into the picture and it's like a treasure hunt where they're kind of who's going to get it first, of course. And there's a really cool fight scene in the boat ship that was, I had some troubles with that. Did you?
Yeah, we'll talk about that later on when we get to the review.
That was interesting in itself, but anything else that we need to go into? I don't want to. I mean, we could sit here and I could give an hour overview of the game, but I don't want to go too much into details. Any other thoughts?
I think you hit everything. There's a lot of there's a lot of tense moments. Like things are like blowing up, things are falling apart, people might be dying. It's crazy. It's crazy.
You're climbing mountains.
Your forearms are getting big.
You're climbing a building. Popeye. You're climbing more buildings. Mountains.
A lot of climbing in this game.
Climbing simulator.
Yep. But yeah, no, that's really about it. So let's delve into some of these themes then. One of the major themes of this game, and you kind of mentioned it earlier, how at the start of the game, we see this total 180 shift in Nathan Drake. Normally, he would be all gung-ho about exploring different places and looking for treasure, even if he doesn't have permits or things that allow him to do it legally. But we see this shift where he's more reserved now. He's definitely retired, and yet when Sam comes into the picture, he kind of rekindles that desire inside Nathan to chase after treasure, and it's interesting because I remember how at the end of Uncharted 3, Nathan goes up to Elena at the airport, and Elena says, "Oh, you lost your ring," and he says, "Yeah, but I got a better one instead." And he pulls out his wedding ring and puts it back on. And so that's kind of him saying, "I'm done with this life. I'm going to settle down. I'm going to stop." But then we see him get back into it, And there's several pieces of dialogue where you see him kind of choosing this treasure over everything else, and he becomes obsessed again. And that greed starts settling in. And really, the whole story behind Captain Henry Avery and Libertalia is one of greed and obsession and a little bit of paranoia as well. And I'm trying to think of the best way to go about this, but we see, like I said a second ago, we see Nathan obsessing over this treasure. And part of it is because he wants to save his brother, but he also has to come to grips with the idea that he doesn't really want to let this adventurous life go.
Yeah.
And one of the effects of this obsession, or idolatry as we could even call it, is he lies to his wife. And she finds out about it and confronts him, and he's still lying. And it gets to a point where he's chasing after it so much that he comes dangerously close to losing his wife. And I think when we look at this, it's a good reminder for us. I mean, even if you're not a Christian, to just keep our priorities in check. You know, it's not exactly, we're not exactly in the wrong to want things. You know, that's okay to want things at certain times. But when it gets to a point where we're so obsessed with it and we're idolizing it that it's getting in the way of our other priorities, we really need to take a step back and see what we're actually about to gain. You know, there's a verse in Scripture that says, what worth is it if a man gains the whole world yet loses his soul? And you really see this playing out in Nathan's life as he's struggling with this. And what's interesting is when I was playing this game, I was contemplating and wrestling with this idea of like, do I really need to get platinum trophies in all these games? And I actually asked my wife, I'm like, am I kind of obsessing over platinum trophies a little too much? And she was like, yeah, you are. And so it was kind of a gut check for me, because I'm like, man, here I am playing this game, and Nathan Drake's obsession with treasure is a lot like mine with the platinum trophies. So I'm not saying I'm going to be done with platinum trophies for good, but it's just I'm putting things in check, you know?
It's interesting how, you know, you bring up some different things there that kind of triggered some thoughts in my head. How there's often times in our lives where we think we put something behind us, but yet when an opportunity presents itself, it just takes a half second for us to latch back onto that.
Yep.
This idea of idolatry, where, you know, for myself, just, I mean, this is a smaller thing. It's not a huge thing, but, you know, there'll be a game or something that I'm interested in buying. I'll look it up. I'll find some different, try to find a deal on it. And then I'll put it away. And I'm like, I don't need this. I don't need this. And then a few days later, I'll look it up again. And then the next day I'm looking up, and all of a sudden I've like obsessing over this game that I want, but there's a battle waging of like, should I get this? And eventually I'll just be like, no, and I'll stop looking at it. But then somebody, maybe in the Facebook group, will post something, and then it just takes a half second again for that thought to come back up, and all of a sudden I'm grasping at it again. Yeah. And how so many things in our lives, whether that is treasure hunting or this idea of treasure now, there's a reason that Nathan is excited about going after this Avery treasure, because again, that's kind of like their big prize of their life. I mean, they were looking at it when they were younger. That was a big part of their story with their mom. She was the one who was seeking after the treasure. So it's more than just a treasure for them. It really is a part of their history. It's funny that, you know, I think about this even now as I've been reading some of this stuff from my adoption. It talks so much about grabbing as much history as you can for the child, so that when you get older, you can tell them, because they're going to be curious about their history, because everyone's, you know, their family history is important. And for Nathan and Sam, their family history is extremely important, because they didn't have this really long relationship with their parents because they died when they were younger. And so for them to pursue this treasure is like pursuing after this relationship that they have with their parents, or with their mom in particular. And so you can see how it would be so easy to want to jump back into that, but there's still that tension of, I know my wife isn't going to want me to do this, so how do I balance that? Instead of being upfront with her and explaining everything to her, he's like, it's easier just to lie. Yeah. And so I can see how that, you know, that can show itself in my life again. There's often even sins in my life where I think I've got it conquered. I think I've got complete victory over that. But then it just takes one little thing to show up in the future. Then all of a sudden I'm like grasping right at it again. And it's right where I was a year ago, a few months ago, or whatever. It's just kind of that battle that we can even have with sin in our own lives.
Yeah.
So,
And I think that even kind of equates itself. I mean, Paul even talks about, forgetting which book of the Bible it is, but he talks about having this thorn in his side. And he often struggles with it, but it's often a reminder of the fact that he needs God. You know, he needs Christ's grace to resist that.
yeah.
And you see that Nathan just, I mean, and of course Nathan isn't really a Christian in the game, but he doesn't have that. And I think we as Christians would do well to remember that we have that grace. We do have that strength that we can rely on in those times.
Yeah. Now, the other theme that I kind of want to, and this kind of builds on this, let's talk about how Uncharted 4 looks at marriage. Because I mean, the way in all of the games that they have built Nathan and Yelena's relationship has been just fascinating.
Yeah.
Because they were together and then they kind of split and then they get back together. And at the beginning of this game, they're now married. And the sacrifices, like you've already talked about, have kind of been made. It's like, I'm done with all that. You are what I want. You are what I'm pursuing. And there's kind of this happily ever after. And then we get back into the game, and all of a sudden, Nathan is choosing this adventure or whatever over his wife. And there's a lot of interesting dialogue. You have the moment where, again, Sam is saying, hey, go after your wife. Sully's like, are you kidding me, son? Like, go after your wife. Don't be messing around with this treasure. And he's like, I can't. It's like, I've got to finish this. I've got to find this treasure, at least see what's out there at the risk of losing his wife. But then later in the story, Nathan, I think he falls or something like that off a ledge. And you have Yelena she came to the island, she finds him. And there's this conversation that they have. And so just kind of the dialogue, it talks about, Nathan says, well, why did you come back? You know, to find me, to help me. And she says, well, there's this whole marriage vow thing. And Nathan says, for better or for worse. And she's like, yep, for better and for worse. And so one thing I really thought was interesting is in a culture that has taking the value out of marriage, where you see in movies, you see in media all over the place, it's about cheating on your spouse. Like, there's movies being made where you, as bad as it sounds, like I think of the movie like The Great Gatsby, where you're rooting for almost adultery. Like I've read the book and I watched the movie and I'm like, I should not want Leonardo DiCaprio's character to get this girl, because it's, as much as the husband is a jerk and he's cheating on his wife, I shouldn't want this to result in more. But the way that media always portrays is like, it's not that big of a deal. But in this game, they show an unusual commitment to marriage that I don't feel like we find in a lot of media today. So, and then they said it's like, it was really a till death do us part. And for them, which is like a very real thing, because they're constantly climbing on ledges that if they drop, they could die.
Yeah.
So what did you think as you were watching and seeing some of the way that they showed their marriage? They brought, marriage to the forefront, because their marriage is a huge part of this game. It's not like a side story. I mean, it's a part of the main plot of what's going to happen with their marriage. So what kind of thoughts do you have from all that?
Yeah, I mean, just to echo what you said, it definitely places a heavy emphasis, a pretty much heavy, like, pro-marriage emphasis on this game. And a lot of times when you see Nathan lie to Elena, it's never presented in a way that's glorified, like we would see in some TV shows or some movies that we see today. It's often shown like his lies affect the people around him.
Yeah.
There's this scene where when Elena comes to the island and confronts Nathan, and she's like, I know you're lying. And he still lies to her face.
Yeah.
And she walks out. And you see that she is hurt. Like, and I mean, that just goes to the whole visual, facial animation stuff they have in this game being so good, just the way that they convey emotion so well. You really feel bad for Elena. You really do. And then there's that moment where Nathan is just like trying to get back to work, and Sully, like you said, is like, son, you need to go after her. And there's this moment where Nathan looks at him and goes, Sully, if you want to help, go look after her.
Yeah.
And it's like, dude, that is not his responsibility.
Yeah.
I remember when he said that and I yelled at the screen. I'm like, that's your responsibility, Nathan. You're her husband. And I was so mad, but it's interesting. It goes back to this whole idolatry thing of how.
And as as the player, as we play Nathan Drake as the character, as we move him, as we grow in the story, and as we understand the story, like, you want to like Nathan Drake.
Yeah.
I mean, in all of the games, you're like, this guy is the man. And then you get to that point and you're just like, yuck.
It's like you're a jerk, Nathan.
Yeah, you're like, this is like, you feel the tension because, like I said, and to a degree, should he have gone after his wife? For sure. But there's that tension of, but at the same, like, you almost want her to understand. And again, she eventually does understand. And we'll get to this here in a second about communication. But because she didn't have understanding of why is the treasure so important, why, her brother, or his brother, if she would have known he had a brother in the situation, she would have been way more understanding. But because of the lack of communication, she didn't understand. And for rightly so, she was frustrated. And so, but you're just like, you can feel that tension of, he needs things to be right with his wife, but he needs to do this also.
Yeah.
So let's kind of continue that on, this idea of communication and trust. You find out once they get to the second time she comes and she saves him, that's when they really begin to flesh out that Nathan has not told her anything, not only about his brother, but about his mom, and this idea of this treasure that she sought after and that they sought after when they were younger, about jail. Yelena says, no matter what it is, you can't shut me out. You have to come with me. We are a team. And then Nathan says that he not telling the truth. The reason he wasn't telling the truth was because he was scared. It wasn't because he was scared of losing her. He wasn't protecting her, but he says, I was protecting myself. So just some really great dialogue there. Again, it's really bringing up a lot, again, this idea of marriage. And so when you heard that dialogue, what are some thoughts? And then I've got a follow-up question after you respond, like, to that kind of chunk of dialogue. Any thoughts?
I think when that dialogue happened, there's a lot of things going on, and it's kind of where we come to a point where, like, we kind of understand where Nathan is coming from a little bit, because there are some things in our past that are honestly hard to talk about, and especially when we get into marriage. I know for me personally, I didn't really talk about what I was feeling, growing up. I was just kind of quiet. And so coming to this realization that, after I got married, like, I have to share things with my wife now and discuss these things, it was new to me. And there's some things that I didn't really want to talk about, and I think that's true for a lot of people. But that's kind of the beautiful thing about marriage. We especially here, we see that Nathan has some hurt in his past. But Elena is so right when she says, you have to come to me with it. We're a team.
Yeah.
The beautiful thing about marriage is that we no longer have to shoulder the weight of our past scars anymore. We have someone there who can help us kind of carry that burden in the way that Scripture tells us to carry one another's burdens. But I found this so true in my own marriage. There's been a lot of times where just being able to talk to my wife about things that hurt, or just past issues or current issues, is such a huge relief. And when you carry a burden for so long, it gets really tiresome and it hurts after a while, to the point where you just put up walls. But it's so different in marriage, because you can talk about this stuff. You can shoulder these burdens with one another, and you are a team.
Yeah. And that you kind of segued great into the question I was going to ask. And because there's a lot of times in life, especially when you have two individuals who come from different backgrounds. I'm just talking about just a general marriage. But some people, maybe depending on, especially, non-believers is one thing, but even amongst believers, of, say, one person has a sexual history and the other one doesn't. Say one person had some sort of abuse or something in their past, but the other one doesn't, or just whatever issues, because we all had certain pains that we had before we got in the relationship with the person we ended up marrying. So I guess my question is, I'm not saying lying. I'm not saying, if someone asks you straight up about it, I think you need to share. But is it ever wise? Is there ever things that in marriage that you should keep a secret, maybe to protect your wife. It's not, again, not lying, but maybe just not sharing or bringing it up because you think, if I mention this, it's only going to bring hurt. It's only going to, I mean, I can think of some things maybe with some guys, sexual history is a very easy one. Or for a woman, they could say, if you know your other spouse, if they've not had sex, but you have, you can talk about that. But if they start asking about maybe specific things, or they assume some things, like you decide that you don't want to tell them because it's only going to bring more hurt. Do you think there's ever a time where you should, again, not lie, but maybe withhold information from them in order to protect them, because it's only going to bring hurt? Or do you just throw it all out there, trust that if your marriage is really strong, that you're going to be able to work it out, you're going to be able to discuss it, you're going to be able to find the help that you need to get through it? What do you think? Should we ever maybe withhold information if it's only going to bring more hurt?
I'm going to be honest. I can't really think of any scenarios where that would be okay. Personally, I know some people could probably think of a few different ones, but I personally can't really think of any. And I think part of that is just because I'm so honest with my wife. We're at a point in our marriage where we could really just tell each other anything, and we have this understanding where we might get upset depending on what it is, but we're at a point also where we can handle conflict really well, and we can discuss these things, and even though there might be some hurt, we're able to work through it.
Yeah.
So I can't really think of anything apart from, I went to Chick-fil-A today when I wasn't supposed to. But no, I'm kidding. I honestly, I can't think of any situation. I really can't.
Yeah. And I just know, like, for some people talking about, or maybe even, I guess, these things should always be brought up, I guess, just so that both people have an understanding of where the other person is coming from. Because, I mean, in this story, Nathan doesn't tell some pretty huge things, and it's because of the misunderstanding that causes the conflict. And so if something ended up coming out later in, say, my marriage that I didn't tell my wife, if that ended up coming out later, not only is she going to be hurt that I didn't tell her, but it's probably had caused so much misunderstanding in the past that if I would have told her, if we would have worked through it, when these issues presented themselves in the present, there would be more understanding, there'd be more compassion because of the conversations that we had before.
Mm-hmm.
And so I know that can be hard. It doesn't mean that it's not going to hurt. It doesn't mean that those conversations are going to be fun. There's a reason that a lot of times guys or girls want to keep something secret, because there's so much hurt, there's so much pain associated with that. But if we are truly, getting into this marriage relationship, this one fleshness, then they need to understand these things that cause us to grieve, the things that cause us to hurt, the things that we're even ashamed of. There are some things I remember when me and Hannah, we weren't engaged, we were dating at the time. We were driving up from Georgia. She flew down when I was at training in Virginia, and then we drove down and saw some friends from seminary in Georgia, and then we drove back up to Michigan. And that long drive home, and she's so patient with me. I'm so blessed to have Hannah. She's so gracious, and she responded so well to my. I screwed up bad. I'm going to explain it. So she's asking me about this girl that we mutually knew, and she's like, "Tell me all the people that you kissed." And I didn't just withhold information. I basically lied, and then I got caught in my lie, and I didn't respond. She knew the answer, which is she said, so she knew this person that I had kissed at some point in my life. I'm not perfect, listeners. I made mistakes. But I withheld that when we were talking. And she said, "Well, what about this person?" And I went, "Crap." And she's like, "You just straight up lied to me." And I said, I'm like, "I'm sorry." And I didn't have anything else to do but to be like, "I'm sorry, I screwed up." But there's two sides of that. There was shame on my side of my actions, and at the same time, I thought that I would be hurting her by admitting to this.
Mm-hmm.
And so I was trying, but even like Nathan says, I wasn't trying to protect Hannah. as much as I was even trying to protect the image of myself. Again, there was shame there. So as much as I want to say, oh, I was worried about hurting her, which was true, I was more even worried about hurting myself and the way that my girlfriend at the time, but now wife, the way that she even portrayed me. And so I think that that can be a very common thing within marriages is that we will mask lying to our wife or hiding something from our wife because we think that it's protecting her. But if anything, we're probably really trying to protect ourselves. And it's probably a prideful thing of, I don't want her to think less of me, so I'm just not going to tell her about it. And it can be a big issue there.
Well, it's just like, what you brought up, isn't it interesting how, we often try to protect those we love by lying, but what often happens is they find out the truth, and then they find out that we lied on top of that, and so it does even more damage.
Yep.
So
it's definitely a lot of solid themes wrestling with. I mean, it'd be great if the guys over at the Rugged Marriage got a chance to play this game at some point because marriage is just a huge deal. And again, that relationship between Nathan and Yelena is really some of the best things that we could talk about, that we have talked about, and those guys would probably have some similar thoughts, hopefully, about it. So I don't know if they'll ever get to it. I know Alex is still rocking that PS3, so
hopefully he'll get one. Because technically, if the PlayStation 4.5 comes out, that makes the PlayStation 4 last gen, and he said that he buys the last gen consoles. So, just saying, Alex, I'm trying to help you out.
There you go.
But yeah. Well, cool. Well, let's take a quick break then, and then we will come back with our review of the game. Stay tuned.
Reginald, quick! What's your favorite podcast?
The Reformed Podcast.
What's your second favorite?
Calvinist Batman and Friends.
Chris, I don't think he understands the point of advertising.
Well, another good podcast is The Rugged Marriage. It's our podcast where we talk practically and biblically about what it means when two sinful people say, I do.
Check out the new episodes every Monday and learn with us as we discuss marriage, life, death, sin, and everything in between.
Reform your theology, reform your marriage.
And stay rugged, my friends.
So, Adam, this game, dude, what do you think of Uncharted 4?
Well, let's just start with gameplay. And I think we brought this up before in some of our other talks of the older Uncharteds, or even in the Facebook group for sure, but the gameplay in itself has got cleaner and more crisp with each new reiteration from the original. I mean, the original Uncharted, when you play it, there's definitely some things in regards to like trying to throw grenades, for one, that was just not very easy, and they made it way more difficult than it should have been for something as simple as throwing a grenade. But they cleaned up a lot of just the gameplay aspects. The gunfighting is as crisp as ever. The different weapons, they all have good feel to them. We talked some last week about just how, climbing is a huge part of this game. I mean, as much as we all joke about it, we joke about it because it's true, because you have to do it all the time. But they even refined that in each game to make it a little bit better. Like we talked about, I think last week or the week before, where with the right joystick, if you're trying to go up and to the right, if you put the joystick at that right angle, he's going to reach his arm out and kind of grab it, and then you don't have to like hit the buttons. He just naturally moves over.
That's
and
such
so
a cool.
Yeah, the
such a cool
gameplay,
thing.
they made all those little bitty, again, refinements, and we're constantly making the game better and better and better. And so, it's a third-person action adventure game. So, it's really, it's got that linear feel to it where you know where you've got to go, and you've got all of these guys in front of you, and you've got to kill them, and eventually once you kill them all, you're like, okay, I can relax, gather ammo, and go on to the next fight. But it plays so well you don't mind it.
Yeah.
It's a good mix. If you're used to just playing these open world games where you're going from mission to mission, it's good to get that fresh breath of linear air where I know where I'm going. It's pretty straightforward. I can just enjoy killing people, finding treasure, and climbing this mountain.
Yeah.
And so, what are your thoughts on the gameplay?
Yeah, man, you covered a lot of bases I was going to. One of the things I didn't really like much about the other 3 Uncharted games was that the gameplay was just kind of meh and the controls were kind of floaty. But man, this is the best Uncharted, control-wise and gameplay-wise. It's just there's so much polish in this game. The attention to detail is incredible. Just that little thing like you brought up where you just move the control stick a certain direction and Nathan will reach out and maybe grab another ledge and you can just keep climbing. When that happened the first time, I stopped playing the game. I was like, that is so cool that they put that in there. It's a little thing that you like in the back of your head you kind of wish was there the whole time when you played the other 3 games. But now that it's there, you're like, dude, that's so good that it's there.
Because I don't know how many times I thought I was going to drop to a ledge. Because in the other games you would hit circle, and you can do it in this one too, and he would kind of drop to the ledge below.
Yeah.
I would think that there's a ledge, and I would hit circle, and then I would just fall to my death, and I'm like, dang it. But in this game, you can literally, with the right joystick, push down, and he's going to reach, and kind of you can see where he is leaning to either jump or to drop, which made it, there's probably less deaths that I had because I knew where I was actually going instead of just guessing that I was going in the right direction.
Yeah. It's just... They've learned a lot from the past couple games, and they perfected the gameplay here. And I think a lot of that also comes from them developing The Last of Us too.
Yeah.
Which this game feels a lot like The Last of Us in a lot of areas, which isn't bad. I mean, I think it's only made the game that much better. But yeah, it's just very well done game.
And you don't know how much you love being able to run off a cliff and know that he's just going to turn around and hang onto the ledge.
Nice.
I went and played The Witcher afterwards. And so I've got Geralt or whatever. And I'm like running off a ledge thinking that he's just going to drop and like naturally would not just run off the ledge. But here I am running and dying and jumping to my death because I just got done playing Uncharted 4. And Nathan Drake always just... It was like you couldn't accidentally fall off of cliffs in Uncharted because he naturally will flip around and grab on before you just fall to your death. But that's not the case in other games. They'll let you do that. So just another nice little thing that they have in that game, which is different from some other games.
Yeah. Let's talk a little bit about the visuals, man. How does this game, how awesome does this game look? Let's just start there.
Yeah, I mean, we've talked about this in previous ones. Because of all those that fine detail work that they did, all the facial expressions, the characters. I mean, it really does make some of those scenes that you talked about, that we talked about earlier with Nathan and Yelena and Sully. I mean, you did some good pictures in the screenshot mode or whatever, photo.
Oh, man, I was dropping photo mode like crazy.
Yeah, and so, but it really does bring a lot of the emotion out of those situations. Because you can see it so clearly on their faces. Like you can see it even in like the brows of Yelena when she's like in shock and the hurt that she's feeling when she's found out that she's been lied to and like there's no Malaysian job. And Nathan's eyes when he's wrestling with, do I chase after my wife or do I chase after this treasure? And it's because of that fine detail work that they put just into the character models and their facial expressions, let alone the environments that you're in. I mean, when you're walking down Libertalia and you see all these ruins and you're just like, man, this place is beautiful. Or when you're climbing a mountain or a building and you just pause and kind of do a little scene, scan of the environment around you. And you're just like, this is like better than a picture I could take. Seriously. Yeah. And so, the visuals are just top notch. I know I've listened again to some other podcasts where they talk about, somebody asked a question like, did Uncharted 4 reach the highest potential for the PlayStation 4? Probably not, because as we've seen with the PlayStation 3, they got better with Uncharted 1 or Uncharted 2 and then Uncharted 3. Each one got a little bit better, and then even in The Last of Us. So I'm sure that we'll see games that are better than Uncharted 4, but we're not there yet. And so you're not going to find many games that look better right now as you have in Uncharted 4. Eventually, sure, but because we're still figuring out how to get the most power out of the PlayStation 4. But for what we know right now, you're not going to find probably a game that looks better than Uncharted 4.
Yeah. It's just through and through. Like, there's a joke going around in the group that, you play Uncharted 4 and you spend like 20 hours or so playing the game, and you spend like 50 hours in photo mode. And that was true of me. Like, I would always go into photo mode with almost every new scene in the game that I got into. It's just every single part of this game is something to just look at and go, man, it is an incredible time to be enjoying video games, especially ones like Uncharted 4 that look as good as this does. There's a lot of argument in the gaming community about, like, PC and PS4 and consoles and all that jazz, but man, you have to look at Uncharted 4 and just go, yeah, Naughty Dog did an amazing job with this game through and through, and just it's a game that's just really fun to look at.
And it makes you glad that they pushed it back until it was ready.
Exactly.
It's like, we've talked about this before, but you'd rather have the game look great and reach its highest potential than for them to cut corners, leave out stuff, and then when you get the game, you're disappointed. Like, this game did not disappoint really anybody that I know that played it.
Yeah, no, it's a spectacle. It really is. It's definitely a game that you can look at and just go, I'm glad this is in my collection for visuals, but also because it's just a polished game, through and through. So, now, did you get to play the multiplayer at all? Or?
I did. I don't know, I probably put in 15 games or so of multiplayer.
Okay, what do you think about the multiplayer?
I enjoy the multiplayer. Because I don't play as much multiplayer as I used to.
Mm-hmm.
It was one of those games. I decided I'm gonna play the multiplayer while I'm doing the campaign. If I wanted to take a break, but I didn't want to rush through the game and beat it in like 2 days. So I'm like, I want to play the game. I want to enjoy the gameplay. So I'm like, I'll jump into some online matches, and I did enjoy it. I did way better than I thought I would. Some games I would just get wrecked, but other games, I would do fairly well, and I'm like, this is a lot of fun. Now, it's a different multiplayer. I don't know, I don't play many, or I can't think of many third person. You've got The Division, which was like third person online gameplay, but I can't think of many third person online multiplayer games that are just like a team deathmatch. But so for its genre, I think it ran well. It doesn't have the lasting appeal to me that maybe a game like Overwatch has, some of these other very specific multiplayer games. I think it's a nice addition, but I wouldn't buy Uncharted for its multiplayer, of course.
Yeah.
I enjoy it for what it is, but it would never be my go-to multiplayer. Just, oh man, I'm really jonesing to play some multiplayer. Uncharted's probably not going to be what I jump into.
Yeah, and for the most part, I'm the same way. It's a fun thing to like kind of break up your playthrough of the campaign, and it's fun to play with friends for sure, as is the story for most multiplayer games. When I played, I like ran into a couple of glitches where like the people I was playing with would get like kicked out of the party or get kicked out of the game, and then when we would return to the lobby, we couldn't access the store. Like, the option would be there to access it, or we couldn't like customize stuff. We'd see the options on the side of the screen, but when we go to select it, it wouldn't let us. And so I was like, that's kind of frustrating. I wish that was a little more polished. But I just don't think that there's enough there to really keep me playing,
The gear was pretty sweet. Like, the way that you could trick out all the different characters. Yeah. Like that, I'm not a big like outfits guy and all that stuff. Like, for all the pre-orders, I kind of don't care about that. But when you would like get into a game and you have some like characters just dressed super crazy, you're like, okay, that is pretty sweet. But it is what it is.
Did you get the like googly bouncy eyes for your characters?
No, I didn't.
Oh, dude, they're so funny. You put that on Sully and he looks hilarious. But what they put there is fun. It is enjoyable. You are going to have some entertainment value out of it. I think the emotes are probably the most hilarious thing in the thing that's like worth seeing in there. Just seeing Sully or any of the characters doing like the dab or whatever is just hilarious.
Yeah.
So I mean, it's fun. It's worth checking out. But I just, because of the glitches and just the kind of meh gameplay, I was like, I'm not gonna spend a whole lot of time in this. Especially since Overwatch came out recently. Let's be honest.
Yeah.
That's the multiplayer game to play. So
Yeah.
But Adam, would you recommend this game to the dear listeners?
Of course. Now, I would only recommend it if you've played the first 3.
Yep.
Some of the character development, the relationships, is not going to have the same effect. I mean, this game really does rely heavily on the emotion of the characters, of your investment into the story. Not even just between Nathan and Yelena, but Nathan and Sully. And how, when you get to the epilogue, we didn't talk about much about the epilogue and they're looking through, you're playing as the daughter in the epilogue, and you're looking at all these old stories. The feels are just like, there's the meme of it's like a wave, and people like just put feels on it, or feelings. It is really just an emotional wave of just, you've put all this time into this game. And the reason that epilogue is so good is because you've played the first 3. That last scene wouldn't have half of the emotion or feeling to it if you didn't play them. So I definitely recommend it, but you need to play the first 3 for it to be if you want this game to be as great as it is, you have to play the first 3. You would still enjoy it, and you'd still say, hey, this is a great story if you played it by itself, no doubt about it. But it's only going to mean as much as it potentially can if you've played the first 3.
Yep. I wholeheartedly agree. I think this game is a masterpiece. I think if you have a PS4, it is a game that you should definitely have in your library. I think it is just one of the best video games that has ever been released. It's fantastic through and through. I never before have I played a game and I've gotten to the end and I just felt that wrapped up very nicely.
Yeah.
I'm content. That was perfect. But yeah, like you said, dear listeners, if you haven't played the other games and you haven't played this one and you're still listening, first off, how dare you? You just ruined your entire experience. But second of all, play the first 3 games. I know there's a discussion going on in the group about this, and people were saying, oh, you can skip those games. Don't skip the first 3 games. Those same people will tell you to skip Christopher Eccleston's run on Doctor Who and then just go straight to David Tennant. Don't do that. Because the first 3 games builds up so much foundation, and they are fun to play through still. But they build so much foundation that by the time you get to 4, you appreciate what happens in this game so much more than what you would if you just jump straight into it. So yeah, don't do yourself a disservice. Don't ruin, or I should say, don't cheapen the experience of Uncharted 4 by not playing the other 3 games. Definitely play those 3 games first and then jump into Uncharted 4, and you'll have a blast. It's really good. I mean, and we've talked about this before. Just a heads up, there is a language in the game. So if you're not a fan of that, look up, do your due diligence, look up online for what's said and how often and stuff, and see if, that's going to affect your conscience or not. But I think just for the context of the game, the scenes that the situations that the characters get themselves into, it makes sense. But it's a masterpiece. Uncharted 4 is amazing. Yep. But yeah. Well, dear listeners, this episode is quickly coming to a close.